Welcome, everyone, to For What It's Worth. I'm Jessica,
And I'm Kayla.
and we are going to be talking about current events, what's new, what's happening, what's going on in the media, in the moment stories, just fun things that we're going to share our opinion about. If you haven't been here and heard our message, then go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss um, any of our content. And today we have something really exciting that I feel like maybe I shouldn't use the word exciting, but
Yep.
but something that Kayla and I are both very close to in two different ways. And so today we want to talk about the Josh Guimond story. And if you haven't heard about it, it is kind of local to where we are at in central Minnesota. It is of the disappearance of a college student. And we're going to give you a quick background just in case you're not familiar with it. But I just want to start by saying one of the reasons we chose to tell this story right now, because like I said at the beginning, this is kind of about current events and things like that, is that it's the anniversary this week. And the Stearns County Police Department has been putting out messages. The local media has been picking it up this week. We even saw the story all the way up in Fargo happening. And so we thought that it would kind of be timely. So one of the reasons this story is so close to Kayla and I is we're both Bennies. Her being a current one, and I'm an alum. And something particular about me is this case happened in 2002. And I was actually a freshman. I was actually on campus when this happened. So I have a little bit different perspective. And Kayla has been a part of some news stories and different things. And so she has a different perspective. So I'm going to let Kayla kind of do the overview of what this kind of story was about. If you're not familiar with it, we'll just do a quick overview.
Yeah. So Josh, I was kind of first introduced to this because 2022 was when there was a Netflix series, Unsolved, which was about Josh. They did an episode about him. And that was my freshman year of college. So we both kind of had that starting in our freshman year. And so when I watched it, which it was a long time ago now, it feels like, but basically Josh disappeared in the middle of the night. On campus. So his roommates didn't realize he was missing until about a day later, a couple of hours later. And so police were called, his parents were called, and then it was a massive, massive search, like around the whole campus grounds. And there were a lot of different theories about what had happened to him. And so when I had watched that Netflix episode, it was huge on campus when I first got there. Like it was all anyone was talking about. And the newspaper that I actually now run at school, I was a news writer at the time. And they did a huge full page spread because it was the 20-year anniversary at the time. So they just talked about all the different theories about what had happened to him, what like current students thought about it. Kind of looking back, I know a lot of students do their big final presentations about Josh and this case because it was just so significant in our community. And I think it's just the fact that it's not solved. Like that's one of the things that's very unique about this
For
because
sure.
I know another big thing in our local area is the Jacob Wetterling case, which was a huge national. There was legislation passed as well that made like put this on the big national stage. So I do feel like when it comes to that one, while that case was so tragic and went unsolved for such a long amount of time, it was eventually solved. And
Like
Josh,
26 years later, I think, right?
yeah.
A long time.
That case, actually, my mom, I believe, was at St. Ben's at the time. So there was also like I've been connected to all of these in many different ways, but I do think that the thing that makes Josh significant is truly nobody knows really
No,
what happened here.
no.
And they're still asking for tips. Like,
Yeah.
and one of the things that we found so interesting about this week is the fact that, I mean, there's this huge resurgence of like, contact us if you have information, especially coming from Stearns County, which it happens every year, I would say, with this case.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing it a lot this year, which is really, really interesting. And a couple years past that big episode that drew a lot of attention to it nationally. So yeah, I think it's a really unique case that just continues to kind of be brought up, which I think is a good thing, just because one of the complaints that I remember reading about in that article that was in our campus newspaper was a professor who was a student at the time that Josh went missing felt like, well, we looked for him, we looked, and then it kind of went dead and went stagnant. That Netflix episode got that family back out there again and allowed them to kind of have a platform for talking about their grief and searching for him and those kinds of things. So I think that like that awareness is good and we need it if this case is ever going to be solved, but it's so complicated.
Well, and you brought up Jacob Wetterling, and what's really interesting about that is that case was basically solved due to the media and
Right.
the podcast, because that one had a large podcast out there that talked about the case over the years and how things possibly were mishandled and things like that. And a woman kind of started following it and picked it up from there.
Mm.
And so that led to that case being followed of like the media and social media and resources. And I think with Josh, the same thing. I guess that's my hope is as the media kind of picks these up, that hopefully it spreads bigger. Cause I think you and I were talking about too that it was a really big local story, especially Minnesota, but central Minnesota, but all of Minnesota, until probably that Unsolved Mysteries episode kind of blew it up nationwide. And I think that just made a big difference, and that was also the same time the Unsolved Mysteries episode was when Simply Vanished, a podcast came out at the same time that I think really heightened the awareness of people as well of this case and what's going on. So um, just to kind of, look at that perspective too, that the media, what the media played back when it first started. Um, like I said, something that was interesting for me being on campus was I was a freshman. I was 2 months into college, like
Mhm.
scared, right? You're a
Mhm.
freshman, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Um, and for those that aren't familiar with the St. Ben St. John's campus, the women live on one campus and the men live on the other, but academics are completely combined. And based on what my major was, most of my classes were at St. John's. And so you take a bus, the link. So if you hear us talk about that, that's the bus that takes the students between the campuses. And I remember getting on the link and riding over to St. John's that day. And we were pulling onto campus and there were divers in the lakes
Wow.
and like seeing that the boats, the divers,
Uh-huh.
seeing the Care 11 helicopter overhead. And I mean, even me saying this now gives me goosebumps, but I remember thinking, what did I get myself into? Like, is this safe? What's going on?
Right.
What's happening? And I remember calling my mom that night and I'm like, I want to come home. I want to quit. Like, this is like, if this
Yeah.
is what this is going to be like divers. And then after that, our rooms were searched, like they went room to room, which I appreciate. I'm glad, that thorough. But and I this is not being said in a negative way whatsoever, but his dad came to campus a lot. And at times, because I don't know what I would be like if this happened to my son,
Right.
but we would be standing in line at St. John's to come back to St. Ben's on the bus, and he'd be there kind of upset, like, why isn't more things being done? And why aren't more people helping? And that got a little frightening at times but you felt for him.
Right. Right.
But it was just a different experience going through all this, like I said, 2 months into your first year of college, and
Right.
you're like, what is going on? And something that I found interesting too is um, it was really front and center for us as students for like a couple weeks, but then it did kind of die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you said, it was just like, okay, let's do this big push. We searched, we couldn't find them. There's a few theories out there. Who knows what's going on? But that's really what we want to get into with this podcast, again, for what it's worth. So we're going to share our opinions. And really, there are kind of three theories out there. And the first one being sort of like the drowning, like I said, the divers
The
and things like
initial
that.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's kind of where it started, like literally instantly, that's what they thought happened is because also just a quick step back, if you don't understand the St. John's campus, like the main campus is up kind of almost a little hill,
Mhm.
and then there's water. So you kind of walk over the water, and then there's housing down at the bottom of the hill a little bit. And that's where he went to a party
Mhm.
at that housing. And so the that water in between, I think, is what kind of led to that. But
Yeah, and I think that what's really eerie about this too is at the time that this Netflix episode came out, like it was my freshman year. But my boyfriend was a year older than me and lived in sophomore housing, which was right next to where Josh's apartment was. And so yeah, he walked down, I believe, I think
yeah,
around 11 p.m.
yep,
and
yep,
walked across that kind of bridge where there's water underneath. So it makes sense that that would be the initial theory, and
right,
so many of us, I remember, like, first watching that Netflix episode, like, swore up and down that that's what it
yeah,
was, 'cause it's a knee-jerk reaction. We also have, like, Segatagan, which is right behind the campuses, kind of in the back, behind the Abbey, and so there was also the thought of, like, although there's different kind of lakes in there, like he
Mhm.
ended up in
Mhm.
either one, we don't know. So like that makes a lot of sense to
Yeah.
me. And I remember that was my reaction first, where I was just kind of like, well, that's the logical,
Right.
like of course that's where he
Right.
is. Like it makes a lot of sense just considering like where the campus is and what we know about it. And that bridge is pretty shallow. So I thought it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
perfectly reasonable that he could have fallen or something really tragic could have happened. So yeah, no, it makes sense to
Are
me
you
that
still there? Like, what are your thoughts on do you think it could be a possibility at
it's
that point? Because it is still a theory, but do you think it's a
true. Because
possibility?
I do think that I know I remember from the Netflix episode that they calmed both of those lakes. So Sump Lake
Mhm.
and then Sayatag, and they like just completely searched it, divers, the whole thing.
Mhm.
I do think it's possible that he could have gotten dragged downstream or something, or like something could have happened. He's bottom of the lake. We don't know. It's a very big area. That's the other thing too,
Mhm.
is like
Mhm.
the nature surrounding St. John's is huge.
And
So
beautiful.
yeah, yes, gorgeous, gorgeous,
Right.
massive.
Right.
But so it's one of those things where I feel like, again, it does feel like a logical conclusion, but
Right.
it's not my current
No.
conclusion.
Okay.
No, no,
Okay.
I don't think so. So I think that kind of brings us into some of the other theories of what had
Yes.
been happening. So I would say the next one that people kind of gravitated to, especially after that Netflix episode, was foul play.
Yes.
So did something happen? There was a lot of talk about his roommate. His roommate was dating his ex-girlfriend or seeing his ex-girlfriend, and there
Uh-huh.
was something going on there. They found out later that his computer, Josh's computer, had been wiped by like a washing software or
Mhm.
something. So after he had disappeared, so it wouldn't have been beforehand. He couldn't have done it
Yeah.
himself. They concluded,
Yeah.
and I think that was a recent, like they knew that, but I don't think.
It sounds like back in 2008 or
Mhm.
something that the sheriff's department kinda caught
Right,
on to that, but I felt like to your point, I don't think the media really picked it up or knew about it or the
right,
general public until the 2022,
yeah, yeah.
where that started coming out because along with that so I am completely out on the drowning.
Mhm.
I don't think you can
Yeah.
convince me it's a drowning, and so honestly, I never went to the roommate thing at
Mhm.
all, like, never even crossed my mind, that sort of thing until this came out, and then I was like, "Okay, there are some different things,
Mhm.
um, that could be," but and this kinda bridges into the 3rd one too, but at that time, all these photos came out
Mhm.
of, again, possibly foul play, but it had to do with Josh, being online
Mhm.
and being in, what do you call them, like
Chat
chat
rooms? Yeah,
rooms.
yeah.
And the really odd thing about that was, it sounded like he was posing as a woman
Mhm.
speaking to men, and that had never come out, never crossed people's mind or anything, and so once that surfaced, people really started to look into this foul play sort of thing,
Mhm.
like, did he meet up with somebody?
Right.
Where was that at, you know?
Right. Yeah, and I that was the big takeaway I think from, I don't want to, it's been a while since I've seen it, but the Netflix episode was so, like I think the biggest focus was like what's going on with the roommate, what's going on with the
Mhm,
ex-girlfriend and that sort of
mhm,
thing. And then they
mhm.
did highlight what they found on his computer. Yeah, and I'm not sure if he was like, if he was just chatting older men online or what was
Right,
going on.
right.
But yeah, that was the other theory too. And I would say that's kind of the camp that I end up in most of the time,
Okay.
just because I do think that since he was like on these online chat rooms and no one kind of really knew what he was doing and it was very secretive. Like I think I remember from the Netflix episode that no one really had an idea that he was doing that, which
Mhm,
makes me think that
mhm.
it was kind of this like thing that he was keeping under wraps. So I think it's perfectly plausible that he could have gone to meet someone and it
Yep,
was the wrong person, or they didn't
yep.
quite know who it was. Maybe they didn't know that it was a college age man. I'm not sure. So it was one of those things where I feel like that could have been what
Mhm.
had happened. But it's so complicated
Right.
because it's one of those things where we've been talking about this earlier. There's so many situations here where it's just like there would have been a body, they would have found
Yeah,
something. I mean, they
yeah.
searched, I think I saw that the National Guard got called up, like,
Mhm.
it was crazy. So, it's some of those things you get led to believe, well, okay, he met up with the wrong person. Were they in a car? Like, that's the other scenario where we had talked about there had to have been
Right,
something.
right, and that was the whole water thing
Right.
because they had brought bloodhounds eventually, and they stopped at the bridge.
Yeah.
So that could say 2 things, right? The drowning,
Mhm.
or he
Or
got into a
there's a
car.
street, yeah, it
Yes.
runs right into the middle of campus right
Yes, so
there,
did
yeah.
he get into a car with someone that he
Yeah.
maybe was chatting online
Mhm.
with, or what
Mhm.
happened there? So, that one was a new theory for me
Yeah.
that I started to get on board with,
Right. Right.
but I'm not there either.
Yeah.
So what do I think?
Yeah.
The third one.
Mhm.
Um, it's a tough one to talk about too, but it's something that's been talked about for a long time. That there's some not okay things happening with the Abbey and the Catholic Church, and the St. John's Abbey in particular being one of the main focal points of the abuse and scandal, sexual abuse and scandal that's been happening. And I can't get past that
Yeah.
for a few different reasons. And I'm gonna let the audience kind of look up that piece. There is a lot of information out there about that scandal. There's actually a website dedicated to calling out different members of the clergy and what they've done. And so, I mean, there's a lot of evidence out there. And one of the pieces that really sticks with me is the monastery or the abbey wouldn't allow them to bring the dogs
Mm.
there on there. Like they made them stop at that, and I just can't in my brain wrap around why.
Mhm. Well, and I think also as a current student, like in my experiences, it's just so far from a reaction that I would expect from my interactions with folks
Mhm.
in the monastery and things like that. But
Yeah.
it was a different time at
Yeah.
that point, just because so many of those abuse scandals were just kind of coming out at that time.
Mhm.
It was a very convenient time during the whole thing. So again, it's just so far from what my experiences have
Yeah.
been,
Yeah.
which was so hard for me to wrap my head around, and I feel like
Mhm.
that's why I always gravitate towards the, "Well, I don't think it was something else," side, just
Mhm.
because so
Mhm.
much of my life at St. Vincent St. John's has we know that this is a thing, and it's a huge it's very, very important not to forget about it.
Yeah.
I just can't fathom it,
Did
so
you have any as, like, professors and
yep.
yeah.
Yep, and I love them, like,
Yep.
dearly. So it's one of those things where I mean, and that comes from a very privileged position of just like, "Oh, I just can't even believe it."
Yeah.
But it is one of those things where it's the reality, you have to believe it. So it's unsurprising to me, and I think when we had, looked into that podcast as well, it was that was the main thing, right? That they kind
Mhm.
of they
Mhm.
focused on
The
is
podcast, yeah,
yes,
the
yeah,
Simply Vanished, for
yeah.
sure, for
Because
sure.
the Netflix, if I remember correctly, I really do feel like their end kind of not conclusion because no one really knows for sure, but
Mhm.
the end
Mhm.
thing that they reached was, well, we think it's maybe the roommate, the ex-girlfriend, something was fishy. But I think the podcast, in contrast, was very much just like the Abbey did not conduct itself well, things like that.
Mhm.
And I remember when I had read the newspaper article that our campus did about it, one of the big things that they quoted was that podcast. So
Right.
saying like they could have done more. And like I said, it's one of those things where in my own experiences, it's crazy to me
Yeah.
that there wasn't
Yeah.
that kind of reaction. I can't fathom that just because of how connected the Abbey is to the students.
Right.
But it's just
Right.
insane to me. Well, and it has been 20 years since, or 23 years since. So I feel like, yeah, again, very, very different time, very different scenario. And maybe they were hesitant to throw those doors open because of everything that was going on. There's context to everything, but crazy to
Yeah.
me. I just
Yeah.
don't understand
Yeah.
that.
And I think that's to tie it a little bit back to Jacob Wetterling.
Mhm.
So there was a podcast, like we said, of that one too. I think it's like In the Dark or something. Um, they talk a lot about how the Stearns County Sheriff's Department kind of messed that up.
Mhm.
And so I think that's kind of trying to be alluded to in this case
Right.
too, that there might have been some things that they didn't handle great
Right.
at the beginning. And I know in particular, Josh's dad has come out and said that.
Mhm.
Some of the media sources have come out and kind of, kind of
Yeah.
said that that could be
Yeah.
a possibility too.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's lots of different things out there, but in the end, um, personally, I'm in the Abby in my gut, in my heart, in my head, the Abbey, there was a cover up and the Abbey has something to do with it. So that's my 2 cents of the whole
Mhm.
thing. But
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of in between because I
okay.
do when we had talked about this earlier, I remember, like, the vibe that I got from Josh is he was a very smart kid, like,
Mhm.
incredibly
Mhm.
smart, and so I would not be surprised if he was the type of person to be looking into these abuse scandals or poking his nose in places where
Right.
people might not have been too happy about. We don't know, so,
Right.
again, it's so speculative, and I think
Mhm.
that's what fascinates people about this, but it's also just, like, the unimaginable grief for that family just having absolutely no answers. Because I remember the headline of that article, that we wrote at the time when I picked that paper up was just like 20 years later, still no answers. Like literally nothing. We have all
Right.
these theories, and of course, some of them we can find different. There's so many details, so it's one of those things where you don't want to misrepresent everything
Right.
because it's oh my
Right.
gosh, it's all over the place. But yeah, I think it's highly likely that he could have been looking into something, whether it was people outside campus, if he was looking into, because I know there were a couple other college students that went missing at the
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
I think he was a smart kid, and I think he was looking into something that we don't
Mm.
really know about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, yeah, it's fascinating to me. So I think I'm kind of in between on the foul play, maybe someone from outside campus that he was chatting, and the Abby thing is
Okay.
just so suspicious to
Yeah.
me. So it's hard because it's like you can't really land squarely in each.
No.
But I remember, yeah, drowning. I think that was the initial knee jerk, and
Yep.
it's pretty much out.
Yeah, I think so too.
I
Yeah.
just don't
Yeah.
think that would have happened. I don't know.
Yeah. So just to wrap this up, both of us are marketing professionals in the marketing industry. And I think to wrap it around maybe a little full circle, I'm hopeful that with a renewed kind of sense of the media and the public and the podcasts and the unsolved mysteries,
Mm,
that something can break.
mm,
I always am of the belief that somebody knows something.
mm,
And we're in such a crazy day and age with social media and getting, information out so quickly and theories out there. I think we were also talking about there's like a huge Reddit post with all
mhm.
these
Oh
theories
my
and
god,
tips.
yeah.
And I think I read something about after the unsolved mysteries uh, episode on Netflix that there were something like 200
Yeah,
pretty reliable tips,
yeah.
it sounded like, that came in. Now that was 3 years ago, and there hasn't been, as far as we know, movement. And
Right,
that's the other
right.
thing to always keep in mind is we don't know as the public
Yeah.
what's possibly happening behind the scenes. But I just for me, these true crime or these really tragic, unfortunate
Mm.
instances can be possibly solved, or things can happen with the media and how powerful the media can be and how powerful social media can be and news outlets and all of those things. And so that gets me excited about that.
Yeah, and I would say when the Netflix episode came out, I remember the talk on campus at the time was very much just like people were kind of torn between like how much of this family's grief do we want to keep regurgitating out into the world and things like
Right.
that. But it's in some cases like that is what gets these things solved.
Mhm.
And I think that we don't know how I have no idea how I would act if that was my kid, but these families are trying so hard to continue to get this out there and push it and make sure that this never happens again to someone else if they can help it,
Right.
and that their their kid ends up getting found. So I would say that it's like, yeah, we were very torn at the time, like, oh gosh, do we even want to watch this? Like it just feels so
Mhm.
heavy and so much.
Mhm.
But since the families participated in it, you have
Right.
to think that it was
Right.
necessary. And ever since then, like, yeah, there's been this big resurgence. I don't know if there would have been had they
Mhm.
not
Right.
decided to do that episode.
Right.
And same with the podcast as well. I think it's just one of those things where you have to trust that these families are doing everything that they can to get this
Yeah.
back out there. And even if it is hard, painful
Mhm.
truths to resurface
Mhm.
20 plus years later,
Right.
if the media can do something about it, then it needs to be done 100%.
Yeah. Love it. Well, we're going to wrap this up, but please go out there, listen to the Simply Vanished podcast, go check out the Unsolved Mysteries. Because, like I said, we kind of did a brief overview. We're no experts in the case. So there's a lot of details that we just briefly covered, or things that, might be a little different based on the different source you read, too. So we highly encourage you to get out there, check it out. Share your thoughts. We're really excited in the comments. Please share your thoughts of what you think could have happened, how you feel about this case, different things like that. Because as we just shared our 2 cents, we want to hear your 2 cents for what it's worth. So join us next time for another episode of For What It's Worth.